we would forget that He died for us? It's kind of a trick question.
Yeah, He wants us to remember the significance.
There you go, John. You're not going to forget Jesus died for you, are you? But what could you forget? The significance of that. He's not concerned that you're going to wake up on the Lord's Day and go, no, let me see, what am I going to do today? Let's see, I'm supposed to go somewhere and I'm supposed to do something when I get there. He's not afraid of that. He's not afraid that you're going to forget what the first day of the week means to you, what you need to do. He's afraid, maybe afraid is not the right word, but He's implemented this so that spiritual people will understand the spiritual significance of what we're doing. That's the point to that. That's the point. Yeah, Jim?
I think of it in terms of keeping it present in our mind. So important things tend to stay present in our mind. So while we may not forget that Jesus died for us, they might not be on our mind as we go about what we do during the day, unless it's really, really, really important to us.
Yeah.
And then in being present in our mind shapes how we see things.
Good. Because isn't it true that His death really should shape how we think about everything? That's the point to that, right? And that's the difficulty. Sometimes we get lost in that. We need to be reminded of that, okay? So let's talk for a few minutes. It's 11:15. Let's go ahead and talk about this for just a few minutes. I want to ask this question. Why is a spiritual and eternal perspective hard? Let's think about this passage here in 2 Corinthians 4. Why is that hard? Let's think about some reasons why having that perspective is hard. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Well, we live in the physical world, and we have our jobs, and we have our activities, and all things, and we're just surrounded by it. And so it's very easy to just get caught up in all of that and lose our perspective.
Yeah, good. That's a pretty good general way to say that, right? Very good. Yeah. Right.
I think some of that answer goes back to where we started in James chapter 4 and verse 3. He says, because you ask with wrong motives. I think our motives are misguided sometimes.
Good.
Frequently, perhaps.
Yes. Very good. What else? All good. Anything else? I got some ideas I'm going to throw it at you. Yes, ma'am.
Kenny, a few moments ago we talked about what does Jesus expect, and we talked about to be reminded, but mostly to be reminded that we are washed and that we're forgiven and cleansed. If we would bring that to mind more often, that's the significance of it. And that's very basic, but that's...
It's very basic. We're established in that, but what did Paul say? Or what did Peter say? I want to remind you of that. I want to remind you of how important these basic, fundamental things are to you so that you don't forget them. When I pass, that's what I want you to remember about that. I think that's why Jesus said, I want you to remember me. Okay? Yeah, we do it weekly. Okay? And I personally think that's what we need to do. I think there are reasons why we do it weekly. Okay? Yeah. Yes.
I think this goes back to when you first started talked about stirring up, because we can have that love, but if it's not stirred up, it's of no effect. The church in Ephesus in Revelation is a good example.
Oh, yeah. They lost their first love, right? Good. Any other comments about any of that?
Well, it's tough because it's unseen.
Yeah, that's one of the points that I want to make. It's tough because it's unseen. We want to see things, right? That's what we want. We want to be able to see those kind of things, and I think it makes it particularly tough because it is unseen. And let me say this. We don't see the full benefit now, do we? Do you see the full benefit of being spiritual right now? Let me ask it a different direction. Do you see benefit in being spiritual right now? Oh yeah. Don't you? Can you imagine your life being lived in an unspiritual kind of way? Can you imagine your life being lived away from God? Could you live your life that way? Sure. Most people do, right? But what kind of life is it? Can you imagine going through the difficulties that we go through in this life without God? I find that sometimes hard to imagine. We were in Tampa last couple of days, and my sister-in-law was talking about a job that she has at the hospital. And when her group gets together, they always ask her to pray. And I said, why is that? She said, because nobody else believes in God, for the most part. I shouldn't say nobody believes in God, but she said, no, the rest of them know how. And I'm thinking, how do you live life without God? That practically, I don't even get that. I don't even understand that. But the point is that we don't see that full benefit yet, but we do see some benefit. When will we see the full benefit? When faith becomes sight, right? That's what Paul says, when faith becomes sight. So what does that take now in order for us to have that? That takes a serious amount of faith, right? It has to, okay? Yeah, Jim?
So it's not just a either or, it's a progression, of course, right? And so you don't understand it because you have a spiritual mindset now, but those who don't have a spiritual mindset have no issues. So having a spiritual mind helps you to see spiritual benefit.
Absolutely.
And the more spiritual you are, the more you see. And it kind of becomes a cycle. Now you start to neglect that spirituality, and it can go the other way.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Even during these COVID times, I know people in the world, mentally, couldn't handle it. I mean, seriously. I mean, because they didn't have God.
Yeah. And how have we handled it? Because we know. It's beyond COVID. It's beyond this earthly life, right? So what? I don't mean this lightly, but so what if we die? So what if we die from COVID? We're going to die, right? So, but our perspective, again, it's this eternal perspective, and it's very, very hard to have. But I think, obviously, it becomes important for us to have that kind of perspective, right? Yeah, John?
So I tell you what the people turn to when they don't have God. You know what it is, and everybody else does. Alcohol, drugs, every worldly thing, because they're about to lose their minds, so they do all these things.
That's right. That's right. And I want to talk about that in just a second. Let me ask a question. Do we need to take a break, or we need to keep going? All right. Well, John, how old are you, John? John's a man in his older ages.
I'll be 75.
Okay, 75. He's a man at 75. He'll have to go 3 more times before we quit this morning, probably, if I had to get. All right. Hey, listen, we're going to keep going, but if you need to, I don't mean this to sound bad. Should I be talking about this to all of you? Hey, it is what it is. Everybody's got to go, right? So if you need to go, just get up and go. Let's just do that. So let's turn to Ephesians 4. Let's talk about this for a few minutes, okay? And it'll be fine if you need to get up. Just if I can encourage you though, when you get up and leave, come back. That would be my preference. John, since he left, I'll talk about it. He just alluded to something that I think is right. And I want to talk to you about it from Ephesians 4. This is part of the difficulty, okay, with us having the right mind. Now, this would be my second point. Why is it hard to be spiritually minded? Because being carnally minded is easy. It's easy. And it's not only easy, there are things about it that are good. There are things about it that gratify us. And we're going to talk about that now from Ephesians 4. Look at Ephesians 4, begin in verse 17. Now, remember, Paul's talking to Christians. He's not talking to people who are ungodly, at least in theory. He's talking to people who are obedient, okay? And here's what he says. He says, this I say, verse 17, this I say therefore, and testify in the Lord that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk in the futility of their mind. When he uses the word walk, what's he talking about? The way you live. The way you conduct yourself, right? So he says, I testify in the Lord that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk. And how does he say, verse 17, how is it that they walk? Vanity or the futility of their mind, right? Let's talk a little bit more. Having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart, who being past feeling have given themselves over to lewdness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. There are 3 factors in you doing what you do. There's 3 factors in me doing what I do. There's really 4, but we're going to talk about 3 because everybody has the 3. Not everybody has the 4th one. Okay, here are the 3 factors. It requires intellect. Intellect. It requires you knowing something. Okay, we all have an ability to grasp. We all have an ability to gain knowledge. We all have that ability to understand. That's part of our intellectual process. And then when we know something, we decide to do something. And may I ask a question? What typically helps us decide what we're going to do or not do? Listening to God, okay. That's the 4th thing that not everybody has. Let me just, instead of asking the question and making y'all guess, let me just tell you what's in my head. That's what I have to do sometimes. A lot of what we do is driven by emotion. Right? When you go out to eat, what do you order? What you like. You know, it's interesting. I never go out to eat and go, you know, I don't like that. I think I'll order that because I don't like it. I order it because I like it. And typically I order it because there's a lot to it, and I like to eat a lot of things that I like. It's emotional. Eating is emotional. Now, should there be other aspects to eating? Yeah, because if there aren't, what happens? You die early, okay? I know I'm not the picture of health. It's because I like to eat, and I like to eat too much, and I like to eat sometimes the things that are not good for me, okay?
Ken's been telling us that he's the picture of health, so you actually look good today.
Okay. You probably need to worship elsewhere. I appreciate that. That's good. Okay. Well, the point is, and now I got to get my mind back on track. Thank you, John. Yeah, it's what we like and don't like, okay? When I mentioned, you know, I moved to Alabama. I'm just going to say this, Kent. I'm so tired of hearing Roll Tide. It makes me nauseous.
It never gets old.
It never gets old to you. That's right, okay? But, see, I emotionally dislike it. He emotionally loves it. That's part of what makes all this great. I get that, right? Okay? But we have likes and we have dislikes. And then we make choices. So we have intellect, emotion, and will. We decide things. We choose things that we're going to do. Okay? That happens to all of us. The only difference in a person who is a believer is there's a 4th thing that's added to that has to do with what's right and wrong. What is that?
The guidebook.
The guidebook. And what is that in our head? It's the law, but it's our conscience. Okay? We're driven by something because we see it differently. May I ask you a question? Does it shock you that so many people are just doing whatever they want to do? Does that shock you?
No, why would they not?
That's my point. Why would they not? Let me ask you a question, and I'm going to be very honest about this. As men or women. But if you didn't have a conscience, and your conscience said to you, you know what? God has given me urges. And these urges are from God, but yet they have to be disciplined, and they have to be controlled, and they have to be used within the guidelines that God has given me. Right? A person who has a conscience is going to do that, right? And sometimes, even those of us with a conscience, we may violate our conscience and do something we didn't do. But why wouldn't that surprise you that nobody else, I shouldn't say nobody, but the world, they don't use that conscience to decide those things? Why does it surprise us that people are sleeping with whoever they want to sleep with, as often as they want to sleep with, without giving any consideration to what's right and wrong? That shouldn't surprise us at all. Why? Because they're walking in the futility of their mind. In essence, they don't have information that tells them that's not what you should do. Right? Am I right about that? And what happens to us when we lose our mind, When we're not thinking right, when we've missed what it is that God wants us to do, or we take time off or whatever, we make mistakes. And what I think what Paul is saying here is, when you don't have God in your mind, you'll do anything that you're big enough to do. They're past feeling. What happens when you're past feeling? You do whatever you're big enough to do, right? And that's what a lot of people do. Look at verse 20. But you have not what? You've not so learned Christ. Christ has taught you differently. See, he goes on to say the truth is in Jesus. Okay? The truth is in Jesus. You've learned differently than that. Let me ask you this question. Do you, for the most part, know how you ought to live your life morally? Yes. Why? Because most of us have been in this book. Many of us have been raised by people that helped us understand this book, right? We know how we ought to act in this life. I've told this story in multiple places, and I'll tell it again because it's made such an impact. To me, it makes a point. When I was a boy, I have two sisters. When I was a boy, the three of us would travel with my parents. We'd go to L.A., Lower Alabama, where my grandparents lived. My dad was raised in Evergreen. Anybody ever heard of Evergreen, Alabama? Okay, a few of you have. My dad was Connecticut County sausage. That's what you know about Evergreen, Alabama. But anyway, we would go to Evergreen, and when we were small, we would leave early in the morning. Dad would wake us up about 4, and we'd sleep. The kids would sleep. We'd get in that back seat. And the first new car we ever owned was a 1967 Star Chief Executive, okay, Pontiac. First, I can still smell it. And we'd get in the car. Dad wakes up about 4, and I figured out they'd wake us up and we'd leave while it was night, so we'd sleep a while. I know the tricks now. But we would sleep, and Dad, we'd sleep for a couple hours, and when we'd get to Memphis, we'd cross the Mississippi River, and there's a big bridge. When you're from Ball Knob, Arkansas, like we were, when you get to the bridge, the big bridge, that's a big deal. So we'd say, Dad, when we get to the bridge, wake us up. So right before we'd cross the bridge, Dad would wake us up, and we'd go across the bridge. Well, once we crossed the bridge, we were awake. We were ready to roll. And so Dad would drive, Mom would be in the passenger seat, I'd sit in the middle, Nita would be to my left, and Tamara would be to my right, and basically we had about 6 more hours to get to Evergreen, Alabama, on our way to see our grandparents. And so after about, 20, 30 minutes, we'd start creating problems with each other. You know how that stuff goes. I'm the only boy, had 2 sisters younger than me, so I was the pesterer. They were the pestees. And I would pester my sisters, and they'd get aggravated, and they'd start getting loud. And my mother, she's very kind. Both my parents still alive, thankfully. But my mom, she'd turn around and she'd say, listen, kids, we got several more hours. Y'all just need to calm down. Okay, Mom, we'll be fine. We'll be fine. And we'd be quiet for a little while. And in a few minutes, we'd back at it again. And my mom would say, all right, now listen, we got to figure something out because y'all going to have to stay under control. I say, okay. And I was kind of in control of it. I said, Mom, I got it. We'll be fine. Of course, she knew the problem. But that back seat of that car was divided. They had those vinyl seats, and there were ridges in those seats, and it divided the back seat into perfect thirds. There were 3 kids. Anita's area, my area, and Tamara's area. And Mom would say, y'all stay in your area. Just stay in your area. Don't get in each other's area. Well, what I would do is I'd put my fingers down. And I just barely put my finger over into Tamara's area, and I'd barely put my finger, and they just go bananas. I mean, they'd rather me sat with them in the seat than to do what I was doing, because I was just irritating them. It just drove them crazy. And pretty soon it was all out war in the back seat. And when my dad hadn't said a word this whole time. And when he had had enough, he would reach back. Now, I want you to get a picture of where he is. He's driving. My mother's here. He's driving. And I want you to remember where I'm sitting. Where am I sitting? In the middle of the back seat. He's driving. He has 2 arms, but he's driving with 1. Okay? He reaches back without even looking, without taking his eye off the road. And where do you think that lands? Where do you think that hand lands when he's in the back? It lands right above my kneecap, and he squeezes. He knows whose kneecap it is. He squeezes and he says this one word, behave. That's all he said. Now, we love our mama. But we didn't think, at least at that point in time, that mom saying something like that wasn't going to do the damage that Dad did. But when Dad said behave, guess what we did? We behaved. I'm going to tell you what we never did. When Dad did that, I never said, Dad, would you mind pulling over and explaining to me what you mean by that? I never said that. Because why? I didn't need to. Why? Because we had already been what? We'd already been taught. When he said behave, I knew what I was doing wrong. He had already taught me. Okay? I didn't need him to pull over and explain it to me anymore. And I'm convinced, my friends, that Christians, people who have this perspective, people who have this right mindset, the problems that we have, it's not that we don't know what we ought to do. What's the problem? We don't want to do it. It's not a matter of, well, what are you talking about, Lord? What do you mean I can't do it? What do you mean you don't want me to do it? What do you mean you don't want me to have that mindset? It's not that we're questioning that. The problem is we don't want to do what we know we ought to do. That's the problem. It's a problem for most all of us. It's a problem for me. You agree with that? And it's because this mindset that I'm supposed to have, sometime I lose this mindset. And so what does, again, look at Ephesians. What does Paul say in verse 23? You need to be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Verse 22, that you put off concerning your former conduct the old man which grows corrupt according to the deceitful lust, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Why? Why in the world would he say that to these people? They're Christians. Once again, why? Because we forget. We forget, and we need to be stirred up, okay, about that. I don't want to make a few more comments, but any comments about any of that? Feel free. Yeah.
The renewing has to be daily. Otherwise, it gets away from us. Because Mel was talking about distraction. It piles up.
Yeah.
We don't make an effort to do it on a daily basis. If we do it on a daily basis, I think, I'm not to say it's easier, but it helps to develop that attitude about the way we do.
Love it. Love it. It's an ongoing thing that happens every day, right? Good. Yeah. Welcome.
Thinking of even what Paul wrote to the Galatians, verse 16 of chapter 5. But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit against the flesh. There's that constant battle. Even when I thought of the topic, the conformity, there's the other side to conform into what Christ wants us to, and it's a constant battle, because even among Christians, with Christians, we ought never to fool ourselves that, oh, it's just an easy walk over. Just look at how even Christians dealt with COVID, the election, everything you can think about. Christians, but some of the things weren't kind. Exactly. And it's because of that battle. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Do you have a comment? Anybody else? See, that's the point we're making. It's not hard for us to see the battle that people who aren't believers have. We see that. They don't have a battle. They just do what they want to do. But it's a battle for us. Because even though we're believers, we still struggle with it. We still want to think the way that the Gentiles think. We still want to walk the way the Gentiles walk. And again, be reminded, Paul says, that's in the futility of your mind. That's not going to accomplish anything for you. Okay? Any other comments about that? Let's talk about for just a minute. Let's talk about this business of vanity. Because I think this is the thing that, if I can say it this way, how we think about things, I think, puts us in the wrong mindset. When the wisdom writer in Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 2 says, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Okay? What is vanity? Okay, I want to offer, let me ask you a question. because I've heard for a long time that what vanity is, and I think there's an aspect to it that is meaningless. But I want to ask you a question. Is your life meaningless?
It's meaningless without God.
It's meaningless without God. That's right. But is your life itself meaningless? Let me ask you, is the life of a person that's not living for God, is it meaningless? No. There's some aspect of that has meaning, right? But how is his or her life without God? How is that a life that is meaningless? How's another way for us to say that? Yeah.
An evil person can do good things.
Okay.
But in the end, which we all should be striving for, according to Paul and Jesus and everything we read in His Word, we should be aspiring to be with Him for all eternity, as we talked about earlier. The evilness in their life and the good things that they do is not going to get that end result. Okay. So that's vanity. Their life is vanity.
Okay. It's vanity in that sense. That's good. Yeah.
I have some notes here. It says prosperity, success. You have success, but it doesn't last long. It disappears.
There you go. It disappears. It's brief. Right? It's brief. Is there anything in your life that has happened to you that gave you pleasure that's lasted your whole life? I can't think of anything. In terms of that immediate pleasure that's lasted my whole life, okay? I think what the wisdom writer says is your life is meaningful, but what happens in your life happens in short spurts. It's meaningful, but it's meaningful only for a moment. You know, I used to think that, you know, I used to coach, okay? And I know you may not believe this, but occasionally my teams would win games against opponents that were better than us. And I can remember a few victories, and I'd be thinking, man, this is the greatest feeling. This is the greatest feeling that I've ever had. And then we'd get on the bus, and the bus wouldn't start. And then I'd forget about what just happened. And by the time I got home, I was so mad that the bus didn't start, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, that I'd even forgotten that we played the game, much less won the game. And it just dawned on me, this stuff that we get so excited about, it just doesn't last. None of those kinds of pleasures last. And that may be a trivial kind of thing, you know. I'm sorry. What were you going to say?
Was it Solomon that concluded that all life was vain? But I've struggled with that because, you know, even as a Christian, I don't think to me, life isn't vain. We have so many opportunities to influence people constructively, change their lives. You're talking about coaching. I teach golf. I have such a good impact with my juniors to not only improve their golf games, but to improve their character in their life. If I get an opportunity to share the gospel, it's even greater. And and on the opposite side of that, I know there's a lot of serious things I have in my life struggled with, things I wish I could go back and change. But I have often thought that this world, with the right perspective and the right spiritual mind, prepares us for heaven. If heaven was just given to us on a silver platter, I don't think we'd have half the appreciation that we're going to aspire to have when we get there. And of course, that's something that's incomprehensible right now. But me personally, I could not go into the next day or the next month or year thinking that my life was vain and not purposeful.
Yeah, great point. But you know what your life is, even though it is purposeful, even though there's great things that you can do now, that you wake up every day and want to do now, you know that in the end, that what really matters is what awaits you. You know that. That's right. But I see my life as worthwhile.
Every chance that I have to share the gospel or try to set a good example, you know, I want to take advantage of that. And every time I stumble, I want to learn from it and share with others so that they don't.
Right.
You know, particularly when you have your own children, a lot of us don't want them to go down the same path. Some of us that weren't raised in the church.
I understand that. Sure. Yeah. Great point. Yeah.
when Solomon wrote this, he actually makes that very point, that everything is vanity except for fearing God and keeping his commandments, doing the things that's right to him. And this is coming from the perspective of not just one that's endowed with much wisdom by the grace of God, but was wealthy.
He's experienced.
He had every carnal thing that you could ever imagine, he experienced, he did. And this is his conclusion.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's you know what else he says? He says enjoy life. He tells you that. Eat, drink, and be merry. He talks about enjoy your life, enjoy the wife of your youth. I mean, well, all of the things that the ways we love. He says enjoy that, but keep it in perspective. Know that you need to fear God, keep it in mind, because that's all that really matters. But yeah, but have this perspective that life, it is important, but it's going to be brief. It's going to be brief. Look at Ecclesiastes 2. Turn over to Ecclesiastes 2. There's just so much to talk about from what he mentions to us. Ecclesiastes 2, 17 and 18. Therefore I hated life, because the work that was done under the sun was distressing to me, for all his vanity and grasping for the wind. Then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. Does Solomon say, does he mean he hated life? Here's a good question, or does he mean he hated life? What's the answer? It means he hated life. That's what he said, right? But what is it about life that he hated? It was brief. And what else does he say? It's stressful. It's stressful. Okay. Let's take a vote. Life stressful? Yes. Very stressful. Okay. And it causes us, right? It causes us to hate that. But again, it's this perspective that we have that says, you know what? I can live it. I can get through it. I know what God wants. That's what I'm going to do. That's to me. Let's go back to where we started. The vex of conformity is I can conform. Easy to conform. I can live like everybody else lives. But what is going to happen to me if I live that way? I'm going to be troubled. I'm going to be distressed. I'm going to be troubled in spirit. I'm going to be all these things that Solomon says he was, okay? And I'm going to end up, I don't know exactly where Solomon ended up, but if I'm not careful and I go back, I revert back to that mindset that I had before I obeyed the gospel, my life's not going to be what it ought to be. It's not going to be at all what I want it to be. Any comments? I know, and this thing has flowed exactly like I wanted. It's just kind of gone piece after piece, but that's what I wanted. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about you had $1 million, go out and offer it to somebody on the street. What would they choose? Ask them if they knew about God. What would they choose on their deathbed? You know, and it has to do with time. It has to do with what is most important to them at the time. And I can tell you, most on their deathbed would not choose more money.
No, I think you're right about that, 100%. So, why talk about this? It's just to remind us. It's just to remind us and stir us up to remember that we are people who not only believe in God, we have trust in God. We want to look at things that other people can't see. We want to look at the things that are unseen, the things that are eternal, and just be reminded of that. But because we live in time and because we are sensual people, listen, the things that I can touch and see and smell and hear, all those kind of things appeal to me. And that's part of life, okay? I think about who's a blind and deaf girl? Helen Keller. I couldn't think of Helen Keller for the life of me. Can you imagine? Can't see, can't hear. Take away 2 of those senses. Think about the difficulties she had. My only point to that is, think about how valuable those are to us. How valuable they are. But we really can't live by those things. Those things are brief Yeah, God's given those things to us to enjoy, but the perspective we have can't be associated with all of those things. Because if that's all we're about, then we're going to live exactly the way we want to live. Because that's what we want, okay? So our mindset absolutely has to change. And it has to change. I think somebody said we got to think about it every day. That's exactly what has to happen. And I think the difficulty is seen in the fact that Paul talked about it. He'd send these letters to churches that he had already seen, people he knew, people he didn't know, and he said, listen, you got to stay strong. You got to keep doing what you ought to do. You got to keep having that mindset that says, I'm looking at things that are eternal, not things that are temporary. Okay? Anybody else? Yeah, Jim?
I was thinking this kind of an overarching thought that started with conformity. And I'm thinking a related word, transforming. Because conforming you can do willfully. In other words, it's not what I want, but I choose to do it because I've reasoned out that it's the right thing to do. And that's good.
Yeah.
But when you're transformed, you take what you didn't want and make it what you want. It takes time.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, we talk about how we build habits. How do you build a habit? Do it over and over again, and then it'll become a habit. So as you are renewing your mind and as you willfully are choosing to conform to God, you will, in that process, transform to be more like God.
And that's what he wants.
That's ultimately
yeah.
why we go through this life. Because he wants to transform people.
Yeah.
Not just conforming.
Good. Think about who we are. We start wanting our own, what we want. Then hopefully he changes us. We obey the gospel. Everything begins to change. And that transformation takes place in this life. But the ultimate transformation takes place in the next life when we're completely like him. Yeah. Somebody else walk out.
And off of what Jim was saying, the transformation, it's a painful process. There's another analogy talk about going through the fire, burning off all. So even this walk, this journey as a Christian, the avenues to it that are not easy, because that transformation is taking, bending and shaping you into something else.
That's right. It's hard. It's hard. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was going to say, in order to be transformed, we need to go ahead and grow in those Christian races. Let's talk about 2 Peter chapter 1, and remember Peter's the last verse in 2 Peter 3, to grow in grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. That's what we need to be transformed.
Good. Excellent.
Isn't there another word that we use for transform or conform to God? Isn't in Psalms it talks about the law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul?
Yeah.
We're talking about converting.
Yeah, and even conformity, we could be conformed to his image. I mean, there's a lot of places that tell us about that. You just have, it's just context, right? It's what the object is and what it's not. Yeah, yes, ma'am.
I was thinking that as we've studied through all of this, it seems like, and of course this will seem dumb, but it seems like it would be easier to conform to spirituality today when we think back, like in the time of Paul, when they were coming out of Judaism and they were coming out of all these idolatrous temple worship, and there was such a sense of some type of spirituality at that time. And today there's so much apathy and so much acceptance of just everything. It seems like it would become easier for us to conform to spirituality, but it's still not, I guess, because of the draw of our carnal nature. But I was just thinking as you were talking about that, it seems like at some point it would be easier for us to come.
That's a great point. That's a next series of meetings that you have. You talk about that point right there. That's good stuff. That's well said. I like it. Yeah, Ralph.
I've just been thinking through this whole thing. We talked about being spiritual minded or not, and then we talked about the need to be stirred up. I think sort of an overarching lesson or moral for us is we cannot rest on being spiritual and being spiritual minded. It's not something we just fold our arms and say, I got this. we do need to be stirred up. We do need to work at it. There are those things out there, our intellect, emotion, and will that you talked about, that can work for us, but can also work against us. And it's a struggle in the world we have, and especially these times. And the other thing is, we talk about these times being difficult the last couple of years. All times have been tough. All times are going to be tough. And we're always going to be tempted, and we're going to have to work at being spiritual minded. We just can't rest on that.
Well said. It doesn't come easy. It doesn't come easy. But I think I'm the most spiritual when I'm in a place like this. I now value spiritual songs. We sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. Just think about when you sing a spiritual song. You want to test your spirituality? What does that song do for you? Is that just, are you just singing words? Is it all about how you sound? Or are you thinking about what that song is saying? If you're a spiritual person, that song is going to be meaningful to you. It's going to stir you up. The listening, when you're being fed the bread of life, if you're spiritual, that's going to be important to you. But if you sit there and you go, what? I don't really want to be here, that tells you something. That tells you something. When it's time to take these emblems, if you're going, let's get through this, that tells you something. That's why this evaluation process for each of us becomes so important. We just, as you say, Rafi, it's an ongoing thing. In several life, it's an ongoing thing, and we have to keep reminding ourselves of the value of it. It's really important. It sustains us in this life. It gets us through this life because we have this perspective that's different. Great comments. Anybody else?
Can I mention?
Yeah, sure you can.
I was just looking at it, and it just came to my mind. It's like running a marathon, not to win the race, but you want to finish the race, so you have to go through all these basic fundamentals to get to there and finish the race. So and that's what we have to do. We have to study and pray and stay on.
Keep going. Keep going.
Yes, when we don't have God, we are exposed to be in danger. And for me, when I was out of how do you say? My English is that.
It's okay.
Okay.
Mine's not doing good.
When I was in the Word, I tried. When I was in the Word, I was always I was single. And I always was preparing me to go to dance every weekend. So I would put in about new shoes, new everything for be in that place. When I was in that place, I started drinking with my friend. But the thing is, after we would have fun, we would dancing, men tried to, how do you say, squeeze us? I was ending fighting. And then when I come home, I was empty. When I was there, I was happy, but when I came home, it was empty. And I was always saying, God, where are you? I don't even have it in my heart just when I was in trouble. But when I came in God's place, I said to him, please God, take that sensation to go to dance, because I was always, I don't even care if it was 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, I was sitting there driving by myself. And when I tell God to do that for me, he took all the things, because I say, I don't want to play Christian. I want to be me for you, forever. And up to now, I gave my life in 2004, and I'm still fighting for get to his glory.
Well, while together we stand and sing. Hey, is that your story? That's my story. Maybe not exactly the same way, but that's all of our stories, right? Our life is empty without God. Very well said, thank you. It's very empty, and we've got to, and once we fill it, we got to keep it filled. We got to keep it filled. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Peer pressure starts even at a very early age as children. We submit to it. We have to learn not to submit to it.
It's very, very strong. Isn't that what happened to Peter?
Yeah, it sure is. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. Yes, sir.
Peer pressure is conformative. People by nature conform. What we need to do is choose what we want to conform to. Because everyone's going to conform to something.
That's right. That's right. All right, well, all I wanted to do was help us think, and maybe we accomplished that. Be reminded of who we are and what we need to do. So we're going to come back in about an hour and a half, and we're going to talk about then the value of community. And the first question is, what do you think I mean by that? So be thinking about that, okay? All right. Any other comments? Ken?
I'll just repeat what he said. I want to encourage you, this is optional, find somebody and go to lunch with them. Maybe discuss what we talked about and what we're going to talk about this afternoon. But we will reassemble about 1:30, so plan on being back for the afternoon session. And if you're watching us online, it's time for your lunch. And if you come back in, we'll be live streaming at 1:30 this afternoon, and you can watch that session. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you at 1:30.